This is the Dallas Morning News.
This episode is from an independent podcast hosted by the Dallas Morning News opinion team.
Geoffrey Ling, one of the smartest people I know, and after an hour and change, you'll understand exactly why. But what was fun was going through kind of the evolution of his work in neurology, brain surgery, etc. But then also having him really talk about leadership, and you see how important from the caring side, the individual side is, and his service to the country.
Passion. He's so passionate. Washington University, Cornell, Georgetown, Walter Reed, he's got the resume. But I think what's so neat is that he told the personal side. He told us the reason why he was involved in DARPA and the reason why he went over and did multiple tours in Afghanistan and Iraq, really to be on the front lines with the American service member to better understand how they react to what we now know as the shock of like an IED. And that was just it was so interesting because it was a unique perspective that I think gets lost a little bit in some of these kind of like bigger ethereal topics. He made it really easy to digest and very personal.
With all his background, he's at Johns Hopkins, he's at the Center for BrainHealth, and I knew that would be fascinating to talk about from the research standpoint and kind of all the brain elements of it. But the fun part, as you said, was the personal.
Well, he's co-leading it, and there's other people obviously that are co-leading it too, which are great and brilliant. And it really just focuses on how do we get a brain health score? And he dives really into this. We want to train our brains and keep them wise and active, just like we do our bodies. And it's a really neat project that he's working on. So tune in. Welcome to Intersections, where we take a multi-generational look at the critical issues facing America. Tom, kick us off.
Oh, we have a fascinating conversation. A good friend, Dr. Geoffrey Ling, is with us. Jeff, a lot of folks may not know you by name, so I'm going to do a little bit different. I'm going to give a little bit longer introduction. And when I was thinking about it last night on a plane back from D.C., I thought, I want to give the overview, which I think will be a roadmap for our conversation today. But then I also thought of an even simpler way. And that was, Jeff is the person that every mother wants their son to grow up to be.
Wow. That's big praise right there, Jeff.
Let me unpack it and prove it to you. So Jeff is a neurologist, neurosurgeon, and anesthesiologist at Johns Hopkins, both on the faculty and as an attending physician. He spent 21 years in the military, rising to be a colonel in the United States Army. He had 2 different tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, plus 4 tours with what they call the Gray Team, which was the Joint Chiefs of Staff, really looking at traumatic brain injuries and how to treat those in the battlefield. As part of that experience, he then also moved in and was a director at DARPA, which is the defense kind of black hole research, and he headed up the medical side of that. Now, that was fascinating because then he identified and put in place protocols for dealing with traumatic brain injuries, blasts, those sorts of things. For many years, he was the only neurointensive care physician in the U.S. military. At DARPA, too, he pioneered and his team led how you develop prosthetics to move by brain thoughts. On 60 Minutes, not once, but twice.
Yep.
Fascinating on that. Now he is also an entrepreneur, started over 6 companies. A lot of those were actually taking the work that he did at DARPA out in the field, getting medicine into the field quicker, dealing with some of these protocols that I talked to you on kind of how do you judge, understand brain injuries and deal with them quickly when you can do the most effect on them. And companies that are valued well over $500 million to today. In addition to that, has served in the executive branch. He was involved in the White House Science and Technology Office, senior director there, was involved in setting policy under the Obama administration, and actually developed, much like DARPA, but on the civilian side, what has come to be a research entity in the federal government looking at how we deal with a lot of these brain surgeries and those sorts of things. Jeff has a PhD in pharmacology from Cornell. Undergraduate was at Washington with a BA and then on to Georgetown Medical School, but the PhD. And then he has also had both internships and fellowships at Walter Reed. He has had fellowships at Johns Hopkins, again, in anesthesiology, in neurology, in neurosurgeon. So all of those pieces. Jeff, I'm just curious, is there ever any time kind of late at night when you're sitting back reflecting, when you think, you know, if only I had got that accounting degree, I could make a difference?
I would always say that you can always learn more.
Okay, take us back. You grew up in Baltimore.
I was born in Baltimore.
Born in Baltimore. Grew up with a father who was at Rockefeller and in the pharmacology industry, and your mother was an engineer at NASA. That's quite a background. What was it like to grow up, and what were the expectations when you've got two parents that are not only, as Jeff is, very, very smart, but also people that have really dedicated their life to making a difference?
So it was a great environment to grow up in, because education was taught to be the ticket. Whatever you want to do, you have to be educated. So it wasn't about how much money you made, but how much you put your brain to work. So just to step back a little bit, both my parents were born in the United States as well. But my grandparents, of course, were immigrants. They were from China, and they were immigrants at the turn of the last century. But they landed in New York City, and both my mom and my dad were born in New York City, and they grew up in New York City. But New York City was a remarkable place. You know, it's a melting pot, but it has a remarkable public education system. So my dad and my mom went through the public education system, PSX, the junior high school, and this sort of thing. And ultimately, what happened is that my dad remarkably got into Princeton University, where he went. But my mom went to Hunter, which is part of the City of New York system, where she got a degree in mathematics. So my dad went forward and did his medical training, and on it goes. But my mom was I like to call it out, because, you're talking about someone who graduated in the early 1950s, Asian woman with a math degree. Where did she go? She went in the burgeoning space industry. So she joined Martin Marietta, where she worked on the Vanguard rocket program, which is the unmanned rockets. And she, remember, the first two, by the way, blew up on the without even launching. And so it was very dark times. So, but she persisted. She stayed with them. She worked on all the Mercury missions, all the Gemini missions. Then she worked on the Apollo missions.
And you remember that growing up?
I remember that.
What was that like? Because that was really pioneering at that time. So she was kind of on the ground floor.
And really exciting, because she watched how she would say that the error on the thickness of the pencil on the graph papers was significant. So this is before, widespread use of computers and this sort of stuff. And when Kennedy said, you're going to launch a man to the moon and bring him back, that was to bring him back. You can get him up there, to bring him back. That's the hard part. By the end of the decade, she thought that was just the most amazing challenge. And she was one of those people that was called to respond. So, because she was in the space program the whole time.
You know what's fascinating about that and your perspective? So we did that in the space of 7-8 years.
Yes.
That was when President Kennedy laid that down by the end of the decade. So that was 69. We now are trying to go back to the moon, and it's going to take us well over 20 years by the time we establish that to the time we'll do it. We'll hopefully do a mission around the moon next year, but probably not get to the moon until the year after, so 27. What does that say about kind of the evolution of science, the way we apply science, that we could do it with the technology back then that today on your smartphone has more computing power than you did in mission control when we sent somebody to the moon?
So I look back to when DARPA was founded. So DARPA was founded during the Eisenhower administration.
And give us outline what DARPA is, just for the audience.
So DARPA is the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. DARPA's goal is to fund, that doesn't do the work, to fund the research of wonderful American scientists and engineers and technologists to create new capabilities, right? I want to stress that word, capabilities. They're not there just to do science for science sake. They're not there to do Me Too. They're to create new capabilities. So that
really is the black hole research
exactly
for the Department of Defense.
Right. And it's high risk, high payoff. That word is that slogan is overused, but that it was really defines that agency. Your job when you're there is to create new capabilities that don't exist elsewhere.
Push the horizon.
Push the horizon as hard as you can go. Yeah. And it is high risk, high payoff, but there's a high failure rate. This is important. They accept a failure rate of 80%. But failure rate isn't because you just flat out failed. It's because you tried and couldn't get there, and you know the edge of knowledge, which has value unto itself. But anyway, in the late 1950s, Sputnik was launched, and that was the Russians who beat America to space. Not dissimilar to this kind of situation that we're trying to avoid now. President Eisenhower, the victor of World War II, was president, and he realized at that time that the country had become staid. We'd become too conservative, too risk-aversive. Even though we had remarkable talent, we weren't willing to apply it, and we weren't willing to be aggressive about it. So he created this little agency and said, your job is to do this. And that little agency did remarkable things, right? I mean, the internet came from that. That is, the original internet was called the ARPA network, Advanced Research Project Agency Network. Huge. Stealth came out of there, or late drone technology came out of there. The ultrasound that you look for babies, you look at babies, that came out of there. And they all had different applications. So, but one of the things that came out of there, let's go back to space, was they looked at the problems. They said, well, how to create a technology that gives us a capability. And if you want to go to the moon, what do you have to do? You've got to get out of Earth's gravitational field. You need a heavy lift capability. So one of the very first things they did was they created a program to develop heavy lift capability. They didn't develop the whole NASA program. They just developed the heavy lift capability because that was the key technology that allowed you to do all the other things. Now, there's lots of other things to do, but if you can't break Earth's gravity, you're nowhere. Yeah. Right. So that was the big project. And they basically put, and this is what DARPA does. Show me to the people who say they can do it, show me you can do this. Give me a timeline. What they do is they'll give you money, but they won't give you time. Buy the resources you needed, but not time. Time is not your friend, right? So time, as we all know, is the most expensive thing. So what you do is you have a goal, milestone-driven plan where you're kept to that plan, much like building your refurbishing your kitchen. I want this happen by such and such time, such and such a time, and then you pay for it incrementally like that. So there's a shared risk. But the most important thing is you would say, well, what would it take for you to do my kitchen instead of a year in 6 months? Well, I'll take another $10,000 because I'm going to have to hire 3 more people and the like. Here's $10,000. Now, what would it take to get it done in 3 months? Well, shoot, that's going to take another 10 grand. Well, here's another 10 grand. Because what's 20 grand versus to get something done in 3 months versus a year, right? And we know the value of time. So that's how DARPA does it. But so they did this. They developed the heavy lift rocket capability that became the rocket engines of the Saturn V, right? By the way, it's a military thing, so they were really building it for intercontinental ballistic missiles. But guess what? They could use it for space. Sure. But where did NASA come from? It came from that DARPA office. That DARPA office that created the Saturn rocket, they took them lock, stock, and barrel, pulled them out of DARPA, and made them NASA. That is NASA's genesis. So that's what I'm saying. So you come to today. Where are we today?
Yeah, because we've got the capability to go through gravity.
But it is, again, it comes back to, it's a mindset. In our society.
Not money, but mindset.
It's a mindset. But we have money. This is a wealthy nation. We have money, right? We have money. We have the highest GNP of any country in the world, bar none. In fact, higher than the next two combined, and one of them is China. We're better than double China, right? We have the smarts. We have people, and this is the best thing that we have. The people in this country, we teach our young to challenge conventional wisdom. We teach them to challenge authority. We teach them that. Within boundaries, of course. But when you go to get a PhD, your hypothesis has to be challenging conventional wisdom. When you go and become, an athlete, you are there to beat the record, right? In everything we do, this is not something that is embraced in other countries, particularly totalitarian countries.
But then, Jeff,
but we have it.
So why? We've got the people. You said that.
Right.
We've got the money. We've got the technology far beyond what we were in the 60s. So why is it taking us twice as long to get to the moon?
So it's obvious. It's leadership. It's leadership. It's always leadership. Patton was able to do what he was done because he was a remarkable combat leader, right? Kennedy was able to get us to the moon because he was a remarkable visionary and a remarkable leader. And now we can go down the list. Lincoln was a remarkable leader, right? Leadership, leadership, leadership. And when leadership says, we will go to the moon again, not in 20 years, in 5 years, do it. Do it. That is leadership. And then you have to resource them.
Yeah.
But we have the resources. But when leadership says, do X, and then minions resource these people, that happens. That's what happened. When you look at what the resourcing to do the moon launch was, it was huge. I mean, I forget what percent of the GNP it was, but it was large. It was like 5% by itself or something like that. It was something insane just to get to the moon. But America, who else but America could do it? The whole world watched. The whole world watched. We clearly led.
But the flip side of that is today, it's disappointing that given we've got all the capabilities of having done it before, that time it was, could you do it?
Right.
No question about that now because we've already done it. But it's taking us twice as long and we end up with failure after delay and that sort of thing.
Well, but it's also leadership, but that leader has to hold accountability.
Absolutely.
Right? Because there's no reason for this.
But it's really disappointing to see
more than
something like that where we can't do something that's a big task, where, as you said, all the elements are in place. But let's go back to Jeff. So that background, clearly parents that were skilled and contributing. So where did medicine come in? What got you to medicine, and where did that come about as really the avocation?
So medicine was a family business. All right. So there are 16 MDs in my family. Just to call it out. But for me, it wasn't.
So you could start your own hospital.
Yeah, we could. But for me, that wasn't the driver. That wasn't really the driver. So when I was young, I was interested in science. My thought was I wanted to find a cure for a disease, right? And so I did a rotation with my uncle Tommy, who was at
what disease?
So I'll come to that. So my uncle Tommy was a pediatrician, and so he said, "Well, I was in college. Why don't you do a summer rotation with me?" And I said, "Oh, I'd love to." Right? And my dad had already got me.
So
into
you're at
science.
Washington University now.
I'm at Washington as an undergrad, and so I did a summer with my uncle Tommy. And I remember this one patient he had, and we were and we'll simply say this young fellow was suffering from a childhood cancer. And he was in terrible pain. And I remember that when he got his pain medicine, he became a child again, right? Because when the pain went away. And so I knew that a lot of people were focused on finding a cure for his childhood disease. My thing was, but I want to improve his quality of life. And so at that particular time and things, I said to myself, I saw the magic of medicines, right? And so I said, you know what? I want to be a scientist. I want to go find medicines that can improve people's quality of life. That young fellow ended up passing away, of course, during the summer, which was just tragic. I was in tears. But at that moment, it was a galvanizing moment. I said, I will go into science. Right. So when I graduated from Washington University in St. Louis, I went to Cornell, where I entered into the medicinal chemistry program or the pharmacology program. And my job there was to sit down there and think of new drugs and how they would work and how to treat these diseases. And so, in college, I didn't have a normal college like, a lot of guys going out partying and all that. I mean, I was in the library all the time because I had this life mission. I didn't want to be I wanted to spend my life making a difference.
And it wasn't to be a doctor.
It wasn't to be a physician.
It was to make a science difference within the medical field.
Right. So I then became a science. So I did. I mean, long story short, came up with a new medicine, got it, Cornell was happy. They gave me a PhD. I went across to Memorial Sloan Kettering, which is the cancer center, because I wanted to go make a difference. I gave them this medicine and...
Yeah, you did pharmacological rotation at Sloan Kettering.
Sloan Kettering, yeah. I did. So I was what they call a postdoc, and I did all that. But then I saw my medicines being in the clinic, because that's a hospital, right? And I saw that, and I wanted to realize that I wanted to follow these things that I developed all the way through to the very end. And to do that, I had to get a medical degree.
So then I want to fast forward just a little bit. Take us into your military service. Obviously, well-educated, someone who cares about making a difference.
Right.
Why the U.S. military? And then
poor.
Why DARPA?
So what happened was, I wanted to pay for my schooling. And I had mom and a dad who were both this, but I was going to pay for my own schooling, which I did. And so when I got done with my postdoc and decided to transition, go get my medical degree, I wanted to go to Georgetown there's a number of reasons, but I wanted to go to Georgetown.
What years was this?
This was in 1985 when I wanted to go to Georgetown. So Georgetown was great. I got accepted to Georgetown, and then it was expensive. It was expensive. I'll be blunt. It was $25,000 a year just for tuition, right? And back then,
I don't think we'll compare that to what the dollars are today.
Yeah,
but
it's a month today.
But back then, it's a lot of money.
Back then, it was a lot of money, especially for a poor, postdoc who was making $14,000 a year. Time like that, just to contextualize it. And pork chops were 25 cents a pound. So anyway, I joined the Army because the Army said, "Yeah, we'll pay for all your schooling, and then when you're done, you owe some years." And I thought, that's fair. That's fair. So I did.
But you spent 21 years.
Yeah. So bridge that gap for us.
Absolutely. So I went in the Army. They paid for school. They let me do everything.
Was the intent to, at that time, go through medical school? I think it was 5-year commitment.
Right, 4-year commitment, and then pay it off, and then get out.
And get out. Okay.
Right. But what happened was, so but they were great. They said, "Oh, you want to be a neurologist? Be a neurologist. You want to do internal medicine? Go ahead and do internal medicine. You want to be a neurologist? Be a neurologist. You want to do ICU medicine? Go ahead and do that." They let me do all that stuff, and they paid for all of it. And then when I popped out, they were even better. They said, "Oh, you're an MD, PhD. Why don't you have a lab at the military medical school?" So I had that. Walter Reed, right? And so I was there, and I was teaching, and I was like any other academic. And then my time was up. And so I actually went to go get a job. I was going to get out of the military, and Harvard offered me a position up at Brigham and Women's. And I was going to take that job. In fact, to the point where I even sold the house. We put the house on the market. My wife got a job at the Brigham, at the Mass General, and we were packing up our gear, ready to go. And then 9/11.
Wow.
9/11. So this was August, September came around. It was 9/11. It was in 2001, and 9/11 hit. And the Army was great. The Army said, "You know what? You paid your debt. You can leave." But who's going to leave the military when the country was just attacked? This is not going to happen, right? So I asked my brigade commander if I could rescind my request for separation.
Sure.
And he tore it up, and I moved from.
That might not have been a tough decision.
Yeah. And I moved into an apartment because I had sold the house. And so my wife, my daughter, our 105-pound German Shepherd moved from a 4-bedroom house into a 3-bedroom apartment, and then my son was on the way. So but my wife was a real trooper, and so anyway, but the point is that I stayed in because of 9/11, and then I was really super lucky. In 2003, I got the chance to be deployed. So in 2003 is when I went to Afghanistan, and I was the first critical care trained, ICU trained doctor to be deployed.
Where in Afghanistan were you?
So I got sent to Bagram, and when it was still a tent city, and it was a tent city. But
and for years, as I mentioned, you were the only neurointensive care physician in the U.S. military.
I was. But I was also the first ICU trained physician to be deployed as an ICU doctor. And that was in 2003, which was really a remarkable, really an upper privilege. And so I got deployed, and I got to practice medicine in the war, taking care of injured service members, and by the way, injured Afghans. So that was remarkable. What the U.S. military does is we just don't go in. We go in and try to help a nation. Mm-hmm. So the vast majority of my patients were actually Afghans. And when I was in Iraq, the vast majority of my patients were Iraqis. And that is just what the U.S. military does. And it was defining for me. Serving downrange, taking care of service members was defining. That's why I created the program to find a replacement arm for these are soldiers who are injured by IEDs and get replacement limbs. That's why I started a program to make medicines at point of care. right?
Because you saw at that time we couldn't get the medicines.
We couldn't get the medicines out there.
Right.
I needed a medicine for a wounded American.
Yep.
I couldn't get it, so I came up with this idea because I have my medicinal, I have this medicinal chemistry training, and we came up with this idea.
We'll get to it late, but out of that came an entrepreneurial effort
later on in life,
focused on that.
Right, but the mother, a necessity of the mother of invention, and being able to do it in the setting of what I was great. And then when I came home, of course, I got the chance to go to DARPA, and I was able to put a lot of these ideas into place. But being deployed was defining. I would go back in a heartbeat.
So talk us through deployments.
Mhm.
Now home.
Yep.
Now DARPA.
Yep.
I think, if I'm a listener on this, I'm interested. What were some of the really, really cool things that you got to go research and study?
Well, the nice thing is that I still wore a uniform, right? So throughout the whole thing, this is not a little thing. I still wore the uniform of the United States Army service member. And so my mission, my goal always was now very bounded. Yes, I still took care of a lot of patients and things like that, but I was focused on the service member. And I was focused on the injured service member because when I was, and I'll tell you a little tale a bit, but that bounded me. The problems of the service member became my mantra, right? I was going to now devote my rest of my career to taking care of service members, injured service members, doing a hard job for our country. And so those kids had to go out on the battle line, but they needed to know that if they got hurt, there were people like me waiting to take care of them, to put them back together so that they could do the hard job that they did.
And Jeff, is it fair to say that as we went into Afghanistan and Iraq, those wars were different than Vietnam, et cetera, in the sense of the brain injury type of thing with the IEDs and that sort of thing. So talk about what the treatment in the field when you're dealing with the brain injury and your background in that area.
Right. So when we went into the war, our expectation was going to be like Vietnam and World War II and all that. But the wounds had shifted. And for one remarkable thing, body armor. Body armor. So a gunshot wound to the chest, for example, an IED blast and where shrapnel hits you in the chest or something like this, that would kill you, right? Because it hits your heart, hits your lungs. No more. Body armor is really good. So body armor changed everything. But it also left the exposed areas, arms and legs, amputations.
Right.
So these are people who would have died, but now they survived. And of course, brain injury, right? Because you can't completely cover the head because then you can't see and you can't hear. So you wear a helmet.
In previous wars, the individual would have been killed.
Would have been killed outright. Killed outright. But now they're alive. And so now traumatic limb injury and traumatic brain injury became the leading combat casualties. So it was a complete pivot. Remarkably, when I left fellowship from Hopkins and went back into the Army in 1995, and I went back in, I started a lab studying traumatic brain injury.
Is that where Prevent came out of it?
It came out of this.
Talk about Prevent.
Right. And so when the war occurred, I had already started, for the military, a effort doing research on traumatic brain injury. Little did I know that blast brain injury would become the big thing. So, right? So then, of course, the IEDs came out and blast brain injury. And this is what I was starting to see in 2003 already. So already we're starting to keep better epidemiology, and we realized the numbers of brain injury were skyrocketing because of this. Where is it coming from? Some of these guys were near a blast, but they pick themselves up, counting their fingers and their toes, and they're fine. But they're what you and I would say they were garbled in the head. All right, so you would say, oh my goodness, they had a concussion or whatever. But how did that happen? Nothing hit them over the head. And it turns out the shock wave was a force that did that. But we didn't really appreciate that. So when I came home, I started the Prevent program, which was a research program to study the effect of the shock wave, right, of the blast. And that clearly, the investigators who did that, Steve Parks and his team, Richard Bauman and his team, Hobby Hetherington and his team, they showed that, and Pat Kahanick at Pitt showed the team, they showed that the shockwave in and itself could lead to a brain injury. Not only that, they quantified it.
Which turned into be a measure that went back out into the battlefield.
It became a measure, right? Sure. And so, but they showed that there was a shockwave. They showed that it could hurt you. They were able to quantify it. All that stuff. And then what happened is, because it's DARPA, make a capability Jeff Rogers, who was an engineer, I don't know anything about engineering, but Jeff Rogers does. He said, "Oh, I can make a little gadget, a widget that you can hang on your body armor that shows the extent of shock that you were exposed to. It's called the blast gauge, and guess what? I can make it for $15. I can make it for $15." So I was like, "Whoa," and of course the same thing. How long can it take to make it? And the guy goes, "Whatever it was, he says, you make it in 90 days, and here's a pile of money." Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I'll make it for more bigger pile of money, make it 9 days. But anyway, so he said, but they did it and it was deployed and it was amazing because now people who didn't know they were exposed by the shockwave, when the unit gets bam, you obviously the guy's down, but these other guys who were like a little bit away, they may not have known. You could took their gauge, say how much, like a scuba diver thing, how much were you exposed to? Oh my gosh, you actually were exposed to more than you thought. Let me test you. That was the next thing that came in. And then they discovered, oh my goodness, because if you don't look, you will not find.
You're seeing the other side of Jeff, though. Yeah. What he's not telling you with all those names is he was the founding director of DARPA on the medical side of it. It was his teams that did it. Plus, it was the gray zones, those gray teams that he went out that did all the research and laid it out.
But the thing was that's just opportunity. I want to be clear. I didn't do those things. I found these people and I challenged them. I gave them money and they did it. Just like with the gray team. What was the gray team? The gray team were senior medical corps officers who had served already clinically. So there was a representative from the Marine Corps, representative from the Navy, Air Force, and the like. Right? There was just 5 of us, and they sent us out back in the theater to go throughout Iraq, throughout Afghanistan. How are you managing traumatic brain injury? This is what we found. This is what I love, is that we found 2 places, one in the south, Kandahar, one in the north, which was actually forward operating base Shank, which was the home of the 10th Mountain Division, and Camp Leatherneck down in the south, which was the U.S. Marine Corps. We found 3 young providers. 3 young providers. One was Jen Bell in the Army, and down south was Tracy Skipton and Doug Nesky were with the Marines. What they did was independently, not knowing each other, they said, our service members are being hurt. These remarkable providers said, we're going to set up a method by where we got that information that we gave. We're going to pull them off the line, 3 hots and a cot, they call it. Pull them off the line for 24 hours. You sit here. You're just in a rest area. We feed you. We get you sleep. And they showed that they could get 98% recovery from these shock concussions from the blast. You didn't have to send them home. You didn't have to send them to a hospital. You just keep them here, 3 hots and a cot for 72 hours. They did it independently. But because I was part of the gray team and I met these remarkable young people, we then were able to bring that back, codify it, write it up as a defense-type memorandum, which is a general order that everybody had to do with these.
Makes it the protocol.
Yeah, what these young kids developed. And that was the magic. They invented it. But what allowed us to do was leadership. We brought it up to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Admiral Mullen got the SecDef to sign the DTM, and that required everybody to do this. Mm-hmm. And it didn't hold the patient accountable. It held the commanders accountable.
And what year was this? When was this?
So 2009.
2009.
When it became fully codified. 2005 is when we started seeing things rolling out. But 2009 is when at that moment, we had a system-wide approach to managing this problem.
And this was post-surge in the war.
Yes.
Yeah. So we're fully into it.
But 2009 and by 2000, and then they sent us back in 2011 and said, our commanders, you get what you inspect. I learned that when I was in boot camp. You get what you inspect. Go back and see that they're doing it. But you know what? They were. In 2011, when we went back, we went all over and every unit, because you know why? Commanders care. They care about their service members. They care deeply about their service members. And so what they did was they created these concussion care centers, co-located with the mental health, because, these are young kids. When you're 18 years old, you just got blowed up. You shake yourself off. You're a little addled in the head. You get these 3 hots and a cot. But guess what? Now you look around for your friend. What happened to Charlie? Oh, he's dead, right? So co-locating it with mental health was huge. Right? So they reduced PTSD that way. They reduced TBI that way. And in fact, Raffles, who did a really nice study, showed that 97% were returned to duty within 72 hours. 97%. That's a magic number. And those who didn't get returned back to duty but had to get shipped back home was a very small percent. It was less than 1% because they suffered from severe PTSD.
So talk about the PTSD, because I think all of us have seen really stories that tug at our heart of individuals in our communities. that have come back with PTSD. Clearly, a lot of success. So I assume we're talking kind of the 3%
Right. So
that weren't dealt with properly.
Exactly. So we have this, the old term for PTSD, let's be honest, and a lot of your viewers don't understand this, shell shock. Shell shock comes from World War I. Shell shock comes from the Civil War, right? And so just the being in an environment where you are terrified because your life's at risk, and worse, to watch your buddies on either sides get maimed. Getting killed is one thing, quietly. Another thing is get maimed, where they blow off a limb and they're screaming at the top of their lungs and they're in agony and you're trying to do what you can to help them. So all those things negatively impact one's psyche. Of course, it's going to give you nightmares. Well, how could it not? Right? And so the beautiful thing is that we've learned so much from our predecessors, learned so much. So when we got involved in the global war on terror, President Bush, God bless him, started to put into place the capabilities to have mental health teams go with the troops far forward. When I was deployed in 2003, I was with a combat support hospital, mainly surgeons, anesthesiologists, that sort of stuff, right? And you think, but there was a psychiatrist. And I have to tell you, that young psychiatrist, she was amazing. She was as busy as the orthopedic surgeons. But that was the point. You had to have these people. Then they train chaplains. Some people don't want to go see a doctor, but they'll see the chaplain. Chaplains are trained in some of these things. Social workers are trained in some of these things. Occupational therapists. We moved mental health and intervention early, all the way out to the front. So you will see co-located, the forward operating bases, these type of providers. It may be the chaplain. It may be a clinical licensed social worker, or it may be a psychiatrist or a psychologist. Doesn't matter. Someone needs to get them. And because of that, we see a dramatic improvement in PTS. Is it 100%? No. There are still more work to be done, but it's nowhere near like what happened to the Vietnam veterans and the World War II vets.
Or what it could have been without those.
And what it could have been. And again, it's leadership. And I give a lot of credit for this PTS to President Bush. President Bush was remarkable in terms of his leadership, in terms of what he wanted to provide to the service member.
Yeah, understand. So I mentioned at DARPA, one of the things you did, which I think probably is better described as science fiction to me, but it's the whole idea of taking a prosthetic arm and allowing the brain to actually move it and manipulate it. I think you made a comment once that is doggone hard to do. Yeah. You appeared twice on 60 Minutes. I don't know of anybody that's done that hasn't been part of a scandal or something, but something like that. Talk about that, and not just, Jeff, how it came about, but kind of the personal satisfaction when you see an individual who all of a sudden has probably in their mind said, I will never use that arm again.
Or they don't even have it.
Or they don't have it, but
right.
I'll never use it.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden to see the look on their face when they actually are able to move the way Kyle and I move an arm.
Right. It's magical, actually. It's really magical when you see a patient do that. But let me bring you back. The question when I came home from the war was, it's not what could we do or what's possible, but what do we really want? So if you go to one of these young soldiers who's lost their arm or their leg, what do you want? Forget the other stuff. I want my arm. And I said, well, you can't have your arm because it's gone. Well, then I want an arm like Luke Skywalker has. I want an arm like Del Spooner has, right, from iRobot. That's what they want. So you know what? Let's give them what they want. Let the challenge be not what is possible, not what is probable. What is it that you really want? They want an arm that looks like an arm. They want an arm that feels like an arm. They want to be able to touch something like they do with an arm. And very important, very, very important, they want to control it the way they control their arm. Sure. You think to move your arm, you move your arm. Your brain does that. Right now, and you say, well, how did they do it before? Well, they had these levers that open and close a hook, and you kind of twitch your body, your residual muscles to do that. So it takes months of training just to open and close this, what we call an end-terminal device. We don't even call it a hand. We call it an end-terminal device. It's a hook, right? And you say, well, I've seen people with a hand in the mall. It doesn't work. It's a cosmetic arm. And in fact, half the patients don't even want the hook, even though it's functional, because they don't want somebody staring at them when they're in the mall. Right? So we know all this. And some of these service members were women, in fact, right? Dawn Halfacre is a classic example. Star basketball player, West Point, lost her arm. She was my model for this. I wanted an arm that Dawn could put on her so that she could go out and wear a sleeveless dress at a ball, right? So that was my dream for this. So the only way to do that is you got to find some way to measure the brain signals that said, move my arm, and then put them into this arm so it will move, right? And so you say, well, geez, that's kind of daunting. But it isn't. It isn't, because one, you want an arm that looks like an arm, has 5 fingers, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. That's an engineering problem. That's purely an engineering problem. So I get a group of engineers. I said, make me an arm that weighs 8 pounds and has 5 moving fingers and blah, blah, blah. But that's an engineering. That's what I want. I want you guys to do it. Think about nothing else. I need to tap into the brain and figure out those signals and get them in there. What do I need there? I need neuroscientists, right? I need neuroscientists. So I don't need a chemist. I don't need a physicist. I don't need, anything else. All I need is a group of neuroscientists and a group of engineers. And I tell them what I want. So what I did was I took a hard problem, but I bounded it, right? I bounded it. Forget about all the superfluous stuff. I don't care about, what they feel about it. I don't care about the color. I don't care about any of that stuff. I just care about you make an arm, you do it. And so I turned them loose. And that's what happened. And what you do is you put the challenge out. Again, I want to be able to tap into the brain so that I can show that in a preclinical model, you can do this. And I'll give you 2 years to do that. And then I want to be in a human in 4. And you're going to get a lot of people say, I can't. I come back to required reading at the academy, which is A Message for Garcia. You guys know about that, right? The Message for Garcia. That story. You know it. I know you know it, Tom. But the Message of Garcia, it says it all. And basically what it came down to, McKinley wanted a message delivered to Garcia. They found a Lieutenant Rowan, and Lieutenant Rowan simply said, they gave him the letter and said, get this message to Garcia, who was in the jungles of Cuba at the time, right? And this was during the Spanish-American War. And Rowan simply said yes, sir. That's all he said. Yes, sir. 3 weeks later, he comes back and he says, mission accomplished, sir. Nothing about, who's going to buy my tickets and who's going to bring none of that stuff. It was, yes, sir, mission accomplished, sir. And that's what you want. So when in this challenge, I put it out there, I said, I got a big basket of money here. Who can do this in 2 years and in 4 years? And everyone, no. But there's always someone who goes, yeah, put me in, coach. I want you. How about the neuroscientist? Put me in, coach. I want you, right? Not what the problems are. It says, yes, sir. I'll figure it out. Trust me. Put me in, coach. You get those guys, and we have them in America. We have a lot of them in America. You get them, and watch what we did. So we had Dean Kamen, the famous guy who invented the Segway, right? He said, I can build you with that arm. No problem. Put me in, coach. And he did. And he did it in the 2 years. Absolutely, he did it. Then I found another group at the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab, and they said, put me in, coach. We built the space shuttle. We can do this. Hey, what is this, right? And put me in, coach. And they did it. However, I must tell you, I'll be honest, Dean delivered in 2 years. Hopkins APL, it did take them 5 years to tap into the brain of a human and do that thing. But you know what? That was okay. I give him a pass on that.
And when were these 5 years? So when did this happen?
Yeah, so we're talking, we started the program in 2008. We actually did it, but 2009 it fully got launched. And it was actually, we were already in people in 12.
And who was the first human arm? Was it the women's basketball star from Army?
No, it wasn't.
Or who was the first arm?
Because it required brain surgery, put the chip in, and so what we did was we went to people who are quadriplegic. So they had no arm. They were Christopher Reeve. And by the way, Christopher Reeve followed our research closely. And sadly, he passed away before he could realize it. But the first implant of that patient happened at the University of Pittsburgh, and it was through the VA. And so the VA were our close. VA, I love the VA. I can't say enough good things about the VA. The VA stepped up. Their prosthetics group, their rehab group stepped up. And University of Pittsburgh.
One of the other things I didn't mention, he was chair of one of the Veterans Administration advisory groups too, research councils.
Yeah, why not?
Yeah. So
why not?
But that was way later. But the group at Pitt, led by Andy Schwartz and Mike Boninger, they got the first patient. They implanted the first patient with a thing, and they demonstrated very quickly that this could happen. And it was remarkable. That video will make you cry because they hooked him up, and I said, I want you to hook this thing up, and I want you to get this patient, Tim, to move his arm, and I want you to film it, because if this thing suddenly catches on fire, it'll be, the bloopers or something like this. But it did it. As soon as I clicked it on, and all they said was, can you move the hand up? And he goes, up, down, left, Right. And the guy's girlfriend started to cry. She couldn't believe it. And she went up and she said, put her hand out and says, touch my hand. And it completely broke protocol. Reached out, touched her hand. And she goes, he held my hand. He didn't hold her hand. That was a robot arm.
That was a 60 Minutes.
Right. That was a robot arm. But the beauty of it was, it's the way he interacted with it and the way she interacted with it. And then at that moment, it became that epiphany moment, right, of who we are as people. Our arms are just appendages, right? It's our brains that control all this stuff. That's what the magic of the brain is. Then fast forward again to the second 60 Minutes, which is only 7 months later, to your point. Now, Jan had this thing in her head. Not only could she go up, down, left, right, she was picking stuff up. And then when the 60 Minutes host said, can you do a fist bump with me? That came out of nowhere. She went up and she bumped his fist with her robot arm. And then that became dramatic because then you say, what happened that he goes from this to all this dexterous movement, as we said, in 7 months, is because you turn them loose. You turn these remarkable geniuses that we have in our society loose. That was done in the applied physics lab at Hopkins, led by a guy named Mike McLaughlin and his team. They did that. They showed it, and it was on 60 Minutes for all your viewers who want to see it. It is and Scott was who was the 60 Minutes
Scott Pelley.
Pelley, yes, Scott Pelley, who was the 60 Minutes commentator. He said this is he blew his mind.
Science fiction.
Yeah.
It's science fiction, but it comes to life. But what it does is, let's now step back. Why I think this is exciting. Yes, we restored tremendous functionality to these people, but we did something else with Jan that we don't talk about. I hooked her up to the Joint Strike Fighter simulator, the J-35 Joint Strike Fighter, and I wanted to see if she could fly an airplane using her brain alone. And you know what? She did. She never had a flight lesson in her life. And I hooked her up to the most sophisticated jet fighter known on the planet. And she, yes, it was a sim, but she had level flight immediately. And I mean immediately. And then later on, we had her land and take off. But you will see her flying this jet fighter with her brain because in the end of the day, our brains are our master computer. Our arms, our legs, our appendages, our tools. We're tool users. If I gave you a third arm, by the way, we showed this with one of the preclinical models. If I gave you a third arm, you would use the third arm as dexterous as using the other two. We are confined only by this shell that we call a body. And our brains are beyond that. That's what is magical about it. That's why DARPA loves this, because DARPA didn't just make a prosthetic arm. They opened a door to what is possible for the human.
Okay, so two-part question. Where does that stand today? And where do you think it's going to go? You mentioned quadriplegics, applicability, people who've lost their sight, their hearing. So where is it today? And where do you think it's going to go?
All right. So where it's today is they've actually been able to put signals back into the brain. So touch is a sensory, right? So the work has continued. So now we did motor output where the arms could reach out and do motor function. But you have to look, right? Because you can close your eyes and feel what you're doing. So what they've done now is they put sensors in those fingers and they've returned sensation.
So I know if I'm touching something.
Exactly. And now it's called what you call closed loop.
Like heat, cold.
Absolutely. All that stuff, right? And doing that, you first is touch, of course, and then the others follow. Proprioception, where your arm is in space, right? These are things, but it teaches you also how the brain codes for things.
I know where my arm is, but I wouldn't otherwise know if it was prosthetic.
Exactly. Right. So now you've closed loop it. So then when you put sensation back in, it lends the opportunity to put vision back in, put sense of smell back in, put hearing back in, put taste back in, all the 5 cardinal senses, right? So that's all work that's going on. But the most important thing was a program that started by Alamondi was called N3. And what he wanted to do was, we know the signals. We know the brain signals. The brain signals are electrical signals. That's what they are. That's EEG, EKG, right? They're electrical signals. So now if you can measure those electrical signals without having to put a brain chip in, non-invasively, that is the next holy grail. Because that means that anybody could put a baseball cap on with an array of sensors bedded and it could measure your brain signals. Now, yes, we're talking about patients who have stroke, or patients who have lost limbs, patients who have had a very severe spinal cord injury, the like. That's an obvious. What about you? What about you? Wouldn't you like to drive your car just by putting your cap on and kind of cruising and say, let's drive straight? When you like to fly an airplane, like Jan did, what kind of new tools can the wonderful engineers come up with? Because then you could, basically use your brain to make them run. You don't need to be stuck by your fingers. Now you could think about what you want to type, and it types. These are things we could do, but it opens another field, another broad area too, and that is now you can interface directly with the computer. The computer can become your D drive, right? And now this is what I want. I want AI working with me.
That was the question I was going to ask. Yesterday I spent 4 hours talking about AI with folks.
Right.
So what does AI do to all this? And what's the potential become?
People are terrified of AI sitting in a box, all right? I do not fear it because humans fundamentally think, so you have to understand what AI, how it's constructed, right? AI really is is basic mathematics, all right? And it was the original AI, which by the way DARPA funded back in the day, called at the Dartmouth conference, was based upon a neural network. You've heard that term before. Neural network was based upon an understanding of how the brain worked. But back in the day, we always believed in something called the one neuron theory. One neuron's connected to two, two connected to four, and the like, right? It's very linearly oriented. So all the neural networks are based on that. Deep learning, machine learning, all iterations therein. But really, the brain doesn't work that way. We now know the brain is dynamic. It has what they call neuroplasticity. It constantly readjusts. As you learn, you create new connections. As you're injured and have to recover, you create new connections. On it goes. So not one neuron's connected to two. Forget that. One neuron's connected to 30. That can change over the course of the day to a different 30. That can change over the course of a year to 100. And then there's the dendrites, which is the back end of the neurons that people don't even talk about. They do connect also. So the connections within the brain far outseed the number of neurons. And those connections are dynamic. They constantly change. So given that, this is what's remarkable about the human brain. But a computer can work faster on certain things, right? Because it's focused and so on and so forth. So if it is AI driven and it sits over there and can do whatever it can do, and you are sitting over here and you can do whatever you do, why can't I non-invasively connect the two of you? I already connected you to a computer to run your robot arm. That's obvious, right?
Yep.
But why can't I connect it so that you can now offload some of your computational things to the computer, that you do the abstract reasoning, the connection of incongruities together and see things. So now, yes, that is a remarkable machine, that computer. And yes, I'm a remarkable biological organism. But put me together, no way will that ever beat me. Because now it's me and it versus it. No way can you beat me because me and it will fight you. Yeah. You see what I'm saying? I think that we're coming to a point, an inflection point, where now humans can really expand the realm of possibility, because symbiosis, right? Symbiotic with this machine that we created, that's the way to go. To sit there and say you're going to regulate and all that, forget that. That is never going to happen. So that's where I see this link happening, and it's there. The beauty, it's there. If you look at the work of Chris Shinoy, Carl Dieseroff, Rich Anderson, Andy Schwartz, who I mentioned before, and I just go down the list, these are already neuroscientists in our society that have already crossed over the brink of this knowledge. We need to engage them. We need to bring them in.
And that's the 3 steps. So there's the directive, which is telling it to do. There's the generative, where it actually generates something. Yep. And then there's the creative, which actually forms things.
Exactly.
New proteins, et cetera. Is that fair, Jeff?
That is absolutely fair. But again, as I say before, is a human with the right tool exceeds everything.
So are there any real world situations, outcomes that you're super excited about with AI and this type of connectivity?
Well, so you know what? I actually, those are interesting. That's an interesting question, Kyle. But in my mind, there are so many brilliant people out there. When given the right tools, they will do remarkable things that I'm not even contemplating. And that's what we want to do. We want to empower those people. And we want to do it in this country. Because this country, we do things, we've always done things to share with the world, right? I mean, everything that we've done, we've shared with the world. And that's the beauty of it. All of the medical advances that you talk about, CAR T therapy, the GLP-1 inhibitors and all this stuff, insulin, the Salk vaccine, things like this, all these amazing breakthroughs we have shared with the world. You can't say that easily for the rest of the world. But that's why I am excited that it is here in the U.S., why we have to maintain leadership, because we don't do it to dominate others. We do it to share with others.
Are we doing that?
Well, so far we have been. And we widely publish. All the stuff I told you about was published in open literature. If you can read, you can see it for your own self. We put it on 60 Minutes. If you have a computer with YouTube, you will see it with your own eyes. So this is the beauty of being America, right? We do this. We're a free society. We do this. The moment we stop being that thing, we will have lost something very special about us.
Are you as optimistic on that count about tomorrow as you have been successful in the past of what you have achieved and seen in the system?
So, yes, I'm a perennial optimist. I believe in the scientists. I believe in the people who have knowledge, the universities and places like that. I'm a little concerned because of the little bit of an anti-science that's about out there, the social media of these charlatans who know nothing and they make, I know this guy and he did, that's ridiculous, so that bothers me that the scientists in our society, the academics, they don't make a lot of money. People think that they're like super rich. They're not. They're just regular people like everybody else. Those who know professors and scientists, they know they're just like regular people, right? They're not tech bros. Those are money makers, right? Well, I'm talking about the real people who do the work. They're just like you and me. And the beauty about them is they're good people. They're the people who live next door to you. They're the people who were deployed when I went downrange, right? So that's why, because in the end of the day, our country is still ruled by the people. You still have to elect our elected officials. You still have to, you pay your taxes voluntarily. On it goes.
But that's based on trust.
Yes.
And the trust that we have now, unfortunately, is tarnished in so many ways. As you said, there's a lot of folks out there that would love to tell you that they're a scientist because they're pushing X, Y, or Z, so there's an economic piece. But we've also gone through a period, and I'll use Dr. Fauci, who I don't know, but I assume is a very good person. But if you walk through the COVID period, he was basically wrong every time he got in front of a microphone saying, trust the science, do this, and it was proved to be wrong. So how do we, with all of this potential, Jeff, that you're talking about, how do we get to that point, build the trust when we've lost it in some of the science community that was put forward as the experts, but still see the potential of the things like the prosthetic arm that you've talked about with all this potential going forward? Where does this go and how does somebody react to all these things?
Yeah, this is the hard part of things, right? Because this is not where the science matters. This is where the policy matters, right? And it all depends upon, again, how do you recreate trust or how do you maintain trust? And that is the hardest thing of all. Reputation takes a lifetime to build. It takes a flash in the pan and it's destroyed, right? And it's all about leadership. It's the scientific leadership, the people in charge, the presidents of universities, the deans of universities, the head of the societies of these scientists, right? And the other thing they have to do is they have to trust the American people. They've got to share with them these things in a way that they understand it. Too much of the stuff, like the COVID vaccine, it was a remarkable piece of science, and it worked. I don't care what anybody says, it works. You know what? And in fact, I wrote in the Scientific American in 2017, I wrote an article about genomic vaccines, and I predicted that it would have value in a pandemic, not knowing there would ever be a pandemic. But I saw where the science was going, and it was there. It was developed in less than a year. It's remarkable science.
Fortunate we had built that platform a decade before.
Absolutely. And so, and thank God for Dan Wattendorf, who funded it through DARPA. But still, coming back to the important thing is that we lost trust, and it was because we have to, as leaders, scientific leaders and the like, we have to engage the American people regularly, right? And we have to share with them these things, and we have to be very transparent with the science, the good and the bad, right? That's how you regain trust. You have to recognize that it's not always perfect. It's imperfect. That's life. Life is imperfect. So, but you have to learn how to communicate. I mean, the beauty of President Trump, the beauty of President Obama, the beauty of President Clinton, the beauty of President Reagan, who was amazing, was their ability to communicate. At the end of the day, it's about communication. It is about being able to let the people that you serve understand what it is you're trying to do and let them decide, right? I mean, you don't mandate, but you let them decide. That's what voting is all about. So it's about communication. And I think at the end of the day, that's what that's where the scientists have fallen short, is they don't communicate well enough. And that's a responsibility.
Are our adversaries taking advantage of us
Of course
because
they
we
are.
don't
Of course they
communicate,
are.
and we don't have that trust, and it's so relationship driven in this country.
Right. Well, look what China does. It steals our IP. I mean, our IP, it's, everybody knows it. Everybody knows it. They steal our IP. Everybody knows it. The Russians wish they could steal our IP, right? I mean, you see the way our weapon systems, how are the Ukrainians winning? They're tough. I get it. But if they didn't have our weapons, forget it. But they had the Javelin. We don't use the Javelin. We gave them all the old ones. And look what they took out 70 Russian tanks in a day with those Javelins, right? That's technology, right?
We didn't give them the ace stuff.
No, right? We gave them the Javelins, right? I mean, that was like 1970s technology. But the point that I'm trying to make is that, of course, our adversaries would love to get access to what we do. But the thing is, we're transparent. Like I said, we publish in the open literature. Most things, not everything. DARPA has a third of the stuff is quiet, right? But I will tell you is that we need to maintain our dominance. And the only way we maintain our dominance is not by being closed, but by being open.
Being a learner.
Right? Yeah. Because let me come back to the original. Why is America special? America's special because our scientists are taught to challenge conventional wisdom. There's always a better way, right? Totalitarian governments hate that. I mean, tell me the last breakthrough that North Korea came out with. Just name one of them. Or Iran, name one of them, right?
And you said earlier, Jeff, it's really freedom. I mean, what we're banking on, I think, when you look at the U.S. versus China, it becomes a bet, is that a system that allows freedom, that allows that scientist to go off in any direction that they want to go and can do it, is going to dominate against an autocratic society where it is a top-down type of hierarchy that dictates where resources go, et cetera. And I think when all's said and done, that's what it comes down to.
Well, imagine, could you allow a group of highly educated people no boundaries in how they think in a totalitarian government? How long do you think Kim Il-jung would last, right? I mean, there's no way. They could never come up with DARPA, never come up with the scientific community that we have. It just wouldn't happen. Yeah. You don't do that with the people that are the most educated people in your population, people with multiple doctorates working on a problem for you. I was talking to somebody who said, I want to work on a cure for Alzheimer's. And I said, drive on, have at it. What does it take? Well, it takes a science degree from a university, 5 years for a PhD, 3 years for a postdoc, and then you're getting started. That's what it takes. That's what it takes, right? I mean, that's what it takes. So unless you have a group of people who you're going to nurture to do exactly that, and for everything else we talk about, you're going to have to allow them free think. It can only happen in a society like ours. Even in Europe, they can't replicate a DARPA. They can't do it. They can't do it. Okay. And that's why good old President Eisenhower, the winner of World War II, he knew that that's what it took, and he created it. I'm sure there were a lot of naysayers in his administration, but he was 5-star general. So he said, "This leadership, we're going to do it." So end of story. Minions, make it happen.
Your life is focused on the brain.
Yes.
You raised an item just a moment ago, and that's dementia, Alzheimer's. If you take the incident rates out as we continue to live a longer life, you can either end up with a lot of tragic stories or a bankrupt healthcare system, whichever one you want to go. Talk to us a little bit, Jeff, about, with all of your understanding of the brain, where we stand on Alzheimer's, what the prospects are, and how we should think about that.
Right. So Alzheimer's is one of the many dementias. There's a number of different dementias, but we'll use Alzheimer's as a term because everybody understands that. Dementia is a serious problem. As our society ages, as longevity comes about, I love what Ian Robertson calls, you want an enriched longevity. What does Jeff think about longevity? Longevity means failure to die, right? That's what it means. It means you ain't dead. That's why you're living longer, right? And you're not dying for a number of reasons. And we'll talk about that in a second. But the point is that people want an enriched longevity. But that is not in the future right now.
Lifespan, health span.
Lifespan, health span. Thank you. Lifespan is extending, but health span is not keeping pace, largely because we don't do for our muscles like we do for our brain. Everybody knows they're going to go exercise. Everybody goes to the gym. But how many of them actually stop and spend an hour a day doing something for their brain, right? They don't. And how many times you go to the doctor's office and you get a brain physical? You don't, unless you go to a neurologist or a neurosurgeon, right? So what we've done is...
The reality of that, Jeff, is if you look over the last couple of decades, the amount of money that's gone into research, especially looking at a healthy brain, has been far below anything you've seen, heart, kidney, liver, et cetera.
That's it. That's
Why?
exactly right. Because those are tractable problems. So
Brain's hard.
Brain's hard. Doggone hard. Right? And so, but let's step back and learn a lesson. Why are people living longer? Failure to die. But why are they failing to die? Is because they're actually doing things to reduce the risk of those things that killed them, right? People do exercise. That's a good thing. They don't smoke. That's a good thing. They control their blood pressure, and they have a number, by the way. You want your systolic blood pressure less than 140. They control their blood sugar. I want my hemoglobin A1C to be less than 7. These are numbers, right? And so now...
And we don't have those for the brain.
We don't have those for the brain. But the important thing is, by doing... This started in the 1940s, by doing these preventative things. And by the way, messaging. American Heart Association, God bless them. You go to your average bus driver and you say, should you smoke? They'll say no. Should you exercise? They would say yes. Is cholesterol bad? Yes. They may not know the number. They know it's bad. Is high blood pressure bad? That is wonderful. That person now is empowered, right? Now, whether they do something about it is a different story.
Well, it's decades of input on that.
But it's decades of input on that. But prevention is what really gave us lifespan. More than nobody can cure you of a heart attack. You get a heart attack, guess what? They might give you Drano, which is what, these clot busters are, or they might stick another pipe in, which is adding another pipe, but they actually haven't recovered your heart at all. So in the end of the day, prevention is the magic. That's why, and I'm going to call it out, that's why Dallas leads in this. Dallas, remarkably, University of Texas, Dallas had the Center for Brain Health, was run by Sandy Bond Chapman, created this notion of brain health and how, in fact, you take the lessons of the cardiac world and apply them to this. Because so we have to hit it from two prongs, Tom. We have to hit it from the prong of those of us who don't have dementia, how do we forestall dementia? And there are metrics. The Brain Health Index is a metric. There's our numbers associated with it. There are interventions that aren't drugs. They're not surgery. They're healthy living type of things. Increase your participation in your church. Get out there and read, learn new language. These things are all exercises for your brain, and they've shown benefit. The second group are the groups that are still in the lab, toiling away, coming with trying to find a cure for Parkinson's. They have treatments. Trying to find a cure for Alzheimer's. They're getting close to coming up with a treatment. Finding a cure for Lewy body's dementia. These things, they're doing their thing. But yet we in the audience now know that we are empowered to also do what Sandy says is have a healthy brain.
Drill down a little bit more. I mentioned the Johns Hopkins.
Yeah.
You are also intimately involved with the Center for Brain Health.
Yep.
You are a co-leader of the Brain Health Project, which you alluded to. I think maybe put that in the context of the Framingham study and what you're trying to accomplish. Tell us a little bit about that and what you hope to pull out of that.
Yeah. So what Framingham did was a remarkable study for those of you in the audience who didn't know. This is a study that was funded by the early NIH back in the late 1940s, post-World War II. And what it was is the town of Framingham, Massachusetts, they enrolled all these people and they just followed them. They looked at those people.
40,000-ish?
Yes, it was actually closer to 20. But it was the town of Framingham. But it couldn't be 40 because they had to knock door to door with a paper, clipboard. I mean, they didn't even have phones, most of those houses back then, right? And it was run remarkably by Boston University. People think it was Harvard, but it wasn't. It was Boston University. So, and I know you're a Harvard grad, Tom, but I'm sorry. but Boston.
The other side of the road.
Yeah, the other side of the road. But they actually went out and they knocked door to door. And what they did was they had these questionnaires and they looked at things like blood pressure, alcohol use, cigarette use, and blah, blah, blah. And then what they do is they followed them for a number of years and they looked at the heart attack rates. That's where they were looking at heart attack rates and then looking at correlations to these things. And with all the data they collected, they realized that there was a blood pressure that you shouldn't be, people below a certain blood pressure weren't getting heart attacks at the same rate people above. And the same thing with diabetes and all these other number of things. One of the things they did find out interesting was alcohol had no effect on heart attacks. So they thought that being an excessive alcohol drinker would increase your risk of heart attacks. No, it increased your risk for a cardiomyopathy, but it didn't increase your risk for a heart attack, which is an occlusive vascular disease. So it was really you learn interesting things that you think are truths, right? So anyway, that gave way to the American Heart Association's guidelines, which was brilliant. So the American Heart Association with the American Society of Cardiology created these guidelines based upon it. We need to have your blood pressure below X, the heart rate, your cholesterol below Y, and blah, blah, blah. And they created these guidelines. And then they disseminated it to all the doctors so that you, practicing in rural Nebraska, have these guidelines. In fact, it's on a website now, but it was in the things. And you would just check it off. And you could actually come up with a number what they call the cardiac risk number. You can actually do it. And it actually puts you in a green, a yellow, and a red. And a red means you have to intervene right away. Yellow means we can tweak this. Green means, hey, you're doing great. Just keep driving on. And then, of course, once the drug companies knew this, they knew they had to develop a statin drug, because first early on it was niacin, right? And then it became a statin. And then they had to learn how to develop different kinds of blood pressure medicines. And then they had to come up with different kinds of glucose lowering drugs. So these are all things. So it gave a roadmap for others now to intervene.
And then the BrainHealth Project?
So the BrainHealth Project, same thing. We needed to do exactly that. We needed to find those determinants of a healthy brain. First, define for me what is the health part, right? That's what they did. These guys are healthy. These guys are not. Now we need to put everybody to be like a healthy person. That's what the BrainHealth Project does. It identifies those determinants of what is a healthy brain. And then subsequently, it lends itself to what are the different kind of interventions we can to make you a healthy brain.
In the project, there's a certain number of people that it's an intensive review of MRIs over a 10-year period.
Right.
In some cases, it's thousands of people that is really almost more of a virtual type of involvement in the study. Total numbers you want to get over the course of the next decade?
So now we're in the magic of not telephones and clipboards, right? We're in the happy world of cell phones and internet, right? And so I know that Sandy and team wanted to be 100,000 people. 100,000. It will cover all the vagaries of different kinds of people, right? Socioeconomic and all that. But they're going for 100,000 people, and they've already in well over 50 countries. That is a remarkable thing. But that's the magic of internet, the ARPANET, and of course, cell phones.
And Sandy and the Center for Brain Health, they're leading it, but partners are Harvard, Stanford, Oxford, UCLA, and on and on.
Right. But again, leadership. Leadership. The University of Texas, Dallas is the leader. It takes a visionary, Sandy Chapman. It takes a drive. It takes leadership. At the end of the day, we all know this. With good leadership, you can accomplish anything. And with bad leadership and excellent expertise, you can accomplish nothing.
And the BrainHealth Project hopefully will do for the brain, defining what a healthy brain is, and give those markers, metrics, whatever you want to say, that allow us to have the research on to how do you maintain that healthy brain longer in life.
And it allows the doctors to do this too.
Exactly.
Because the doctors now can say, what is not just your cholesterol, but what's your brain health index?
As you said, if you go to Physical Day, 99.9% of it is neck down. There's almost nothing that's done for the brain, which is amazing when you think of that's really who we are.
That's who we are. It's how we think.
It is.
I think what's fascinating too is the Center for Brain Health does, I mean, obviously you have this large study that they're obviously trying to accomplish and doing a great job at. They have so many now offshoots. I mean, we were speaking before this.
Yes.
I was a patient
Yes.
Back when I had West Nile, I had brain encephalitis. And so I got to be a part of certain programs, even going back to middle school and the involvement there. Their work, their research, their drive has been, I think, transformative for the larger society.
It's leadership. Again, it comes down to leadership.
For somebody, phenomenal.
For the University of Texas South to galvanize a community, you would think this would be Harvard-driven, Stanford-driven, Yale-driven, right? But it's not. Or Hopkins-driven, right? It's not. It is University of Texas South because you will find remarkable people in remarkable places. And what you find is in some of these places who are remarkable is that they're risk takers. They are risk takers. You can imagine what it was like to propose this heretical idea back in the day. You're talking about remarkable people. Ian Robertson at Trinity, which is the Harvard of Ireland, right? Or Mark D'Esposito over at the University of California, Berkeley, right? The leading places. And then you talk about Sandy Bon Chapman at the University of Texas, Dallas, right? And that's the beauty of it, right? Is that leadership, it doesn't matter where you are. It matters who you are. And to change the discussion from nihilism, you have a traumatic brain injury, you're going to die. That was what we did in the military. We said, no, stop that. Don't say that anymore. You have a traumatic brain injury, we will do everything we can to make you better, right? And you succeed. Remember, pneumonia was once a fatal disease until we now treat it with things.
Back at the turn of the century, the 1800s, 1900s, if you broke a bone, you had a 50% chance of fatality.
Oh, yeah.
Just because of antibiotics, et cetera.
Right. And the other 25% are going to cut it off.
Exactly.
So lucky you, But the thing is, I think that really the take home, I believe, is that there's every reason to be optimistic. I do believe that. I believe that the America is a land of opportunity. I think it still is. And America is a place where ideas to challenge conventional wisdom across all domains is embraced. And that is one of the strengths of our country. And having new ideas is super important. So I'm very hopeful because I believe in our system. But again, trust. And you're right. The one thing that's nice about the Brain Health Project, like Framingham, is that it's not tainted at all. All they are is after the truth. They're not going to make a dime off of this. Every dime they get, they pour into the research. None of them are thinking about how do I enrich myself. This is all about how do I improve the human experience for everyone, everywhere. That's what I love about it.
It's a good way to close. Jeff is one of the co-leaders of that Brain Health Project, along with Ian and along with Mark. There's a fourth one that brings the average IQ down, so we won't go through that.
But is extremely handsome.
We won't go through that. When we started out, I told you that we had somebody that was very, very, very smart. So I think we proved that easily.
We accomplished that. Yeah.
But I think what you also saw is with his service to the country, with his service to people, you've seen the caring side of him. And then you've also seen the dedication and commitment on the leadership side. Jeff, thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.